All right. Thanks for tuning back in again for more NFL draft talk on the Our Lads Football Network as we go inside Our Lads NFL depth charts and our reactions for the 2021 NFL Draft. Cleveland Browns, our special guest is Fred Greetham, senior analyst at the OBR.com, back with us once again. Fred, thanks for taking the time to talk with us.
Always a pleasure, Greg. Thanks for having me on.
All right, Fred. So the Browns, we talked about the needs going into the draft a few weeks ago. And all in all, I think pretty much what we talked about came true, with the exception of, besides adding Clowney, which we kind of touched up on, was looking like a possibility. They did not add any other pass rushers in the draft. So Clowney is going to have a pretty big role now. Uh, Even though, of course, we know Myles Garrett is the workhorse pass rusher on the team, but I was a little bit surprised they didn't try to add any more edge rushers besides Clowney and McKinley.
Yeah, I think they planned to, but they aggressively went after at least two when free agency opened. And I have a hunch one was Trey Hendrickson. I don't know the other name, but I think they just are hard and fast and bowed out when the bidding got to 20 million guaranteed for, and that's one thing, Andrew Barry, they're pretty committed to, their analytics, model. And I think then they felt that they could address it with some guys, maybe second tier by many. Tack McKinley, I know they are much higher on him than a lot of people are. I think they have big plans on him. I know that Andrew Barry really likes him because they put in 3 claims last year when he was waived. And they also actually offered to trade for him, which were turned down. So this is the fifth time they actually, went after him. So I know he's a 1 year prove it deal, but they feel that he's got high upside. Yeah, and Jadeveon Clowney, we talked about it. I think they feel really good about getting him for 1 year at 8 million. Um, opposite Myles Garrett. So you got two guys there on prove it deals.
Yeah.
And I really thought the number one priority in the offseason was edge rusher. And with Olivier Vernon, getting hurt, but also have an expiring contract. I think those two guys will more than make up for it for this year. I do know that they really like Curtis Weaver. He was a guy they liked in the draft a year ago that the Dolphins selected. He got hurt in training camp. They tried to stash him by waiving him injured. The Browns claimed him and kept him on injury reserve all last year. So I have heard he's completely transformed his body as far as strength. And so I know they're higher on him, and obviously they're probably higher than I even thought they were because they didn't address in the draft other than they got an undrafted free agent,
Yeah.
Romeo McKnight. So yeah, edge. That's probably the biggest area that I thought they would get with one of the first 2 or 3 picks. But that said, I can't complain at all with what they did. Um, I thought that as far as one of the biggest surprises was releasing Sheldon Richardson just before the draft. They already had 10 million in space. That was enough to cover your draft class, but for whatever reason they decided to cut him, and now they have 20 over almost 21 million in cap space. Now they went out and signed a plethora of defensive tackles. So even though they said that the door's still open for Richardson, they added, Damian Square and Malik McDowell kind of took a flyer on him, and then added Marvin Wilson, undrafted free agent, but they paid him the most money ever to an undrafted free agent, like 162,000 plus a 30,000 signing bonus. So they went after him hard, and they added Tommy Togiai in the draft. So I think they're thinking those four guys would be able to replace the depth and Sheldon Richardson if he doesn't return. So yeah, that's kind of where they're at in the defensive line.
All right. We're going to get your take on everything else. Before that, I just want to remind everybody that the Ourlads 2021 NFL Draft Guide is out and available at ourlads.com. And if you think that it's too late because the draft is already over, well, you're wrong. Because this is the perfect time to order the draft guide because you know exactly where all these players are right now, including for Cleveland Brown fans. You know exactly where to look for your profiles. That includes Marvin Wilson, who, by the way, did get a third-round draft grade from our lads. So he is one of the top defensive tackle prospects here in the draft guide. You can take a look at Marvin Wilson's draft profile. And coming soon will be the 2021 draft review guide. All right, so I'll be the Browns are one of my teams, one of my 11 teams. So I'll be recapping the Browns draft in the 2021 draft review guide. So definitely order that as early as possible so you get a head start on everybody else. Okay, so why don't we start at the top with Greg Newsom? And, you know, there were a lot of, when you take a look at the top two, people were kind of going back and forth with Surtain and Horn. But Newsom had such a big pro day, which really boosted his stock because of the injuries that he's had over his career. And then he missed a Big Ten championship game, and that didn't help. So it was real important for him to have a really good pro day, and he did. He was really fast, and he's got the length. So you combine the speed and the length, and it's no wonder that a lot of teams were interested in Greg Newsom, and the Browns were able to add him to free agents John Johnson, Troy Hill, of course, will be the nickelback, getting Grant Delpit back from injury, and then also hoping that you can keep Greedy Williams healthy and Denzel Ward healthy. So if this is a healthy defensive backfield, it's a pretty damn good one now.
Yeah, I mean, I going into after where they were, going into the draft, I had cornerback as my number one priority because they plugged the other holes in free agency. And Troy Hill was a great signing, but he was a slot. And I felt that you could not count on Greedy Williams to return because with a nerve injury in the shoulder, you really can't. I mean, I'm no doctor, but you can really not know until he gets hit what's going to happen with it. And you hope he comes back. You hope he's, able to regain it, a second round draft status that he was as a rookie, and he would be able to start. But you couldn't take that chance. Last year, Terrence Mitchell, who was going to be the fourth corner, ended up starting all 16 regular season games and the 2 playoff games because Williams didn't play it down. And so you have Greg Newsom, who ideally Williams can be the incumbent and Newsom can push him and end up maybe winning the job sometime, if not in training camp, but during the course of the season. But you mentioned Denzel Ward. He has not played a full year since he's been with the Browns. Greedy Williams has not. And now you have 4 legitimate cornerbacks that if Ward is out for a couple games, you have 3 others. If Williams is out, you have 3 others. And so the top 4, I think, are pretty strong. They feel good about A.J. Green, a preferred undrafted guy they signed last year to a lot of money. And he didn't play much, but I think they think he could maybe be in the mix as a 5th or 6th. I wouldn't put him past still signing one of the guys, veterans still available, because last year they went through so many corners. Mm-hmm. And when they got in the playoffs, they're playing Robert Jackson, who's probably the 6th or 7th on the depth chart, never played corner in the NFL. He's a special teams guy, and he's playing against the Steelers. So I think they realize we cannot take a chance on that. So Greg Newsom, I think you guys had him in your book, the 4th best corner. And I just think it was a great move. They really are high on him. And, like you said, he's got the size, the speed, a lot of the things you're looking for.
Yeah, and you mentioned Robert Jackson. Now the way that the secondary is and how deep it is, he's going to have a hard time making the team. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. They have signed 6 unrestricted free agents that should be starters or in the rotation. They drafted 2 guys, the top 2 that should be starters or in the rotation. They have Delpit, Billings, and Williams coming back. So they have a legitimately 11 guys that could be starters that weren't on that didn't play a down for him last year. I think you got Denzel Ward and Myles Garrett are the only two guys that will start. So I think they will have 9 new starters on defense,
Wow.
and they'll have at least 2 or 3 extra for depth. And that's not counting. They added 17 defensive players that were not on the team last year, counting other free agents and draft choices. They did not address offense till the third round when they drafted wide receiver Anthony Schwartz. He's the only offensive player, the first one they added that wasn't on the team last year. They did re-sign like Rashard Higgins and
Sure.
Kadero Hodge, but those guys were on the team
Yes.
last year. So that tells you the overhaul they did on defense. And you might say, well, gee, 9 out of 11 new starters, that's a good thing because that defense was atrocious. They gave up 26.2 points a game last year.
Absolutely. And we talked about that. And that's why it's a good point that you bring up Schwartz, because I was just about to mention how you look at, let's just say if we're not thinking about free agency at all, and the fact that they did neglect any other new offensive players, it would have been a lot harder for me to understand why they did go with Schwartz in the third round and James Hudson with their top pick in the fourth round. Because, well, first of all, our lads had these guys graded a little bit further down the road because Schwartz is mainly a speed guy. I mean, really fast, fastest college football player in the nation last year. That's how fast he is. So we understand the speed factor, but he's also a lot of technique work, and he's not a finished product. And then you have James Hudson, who's a 1-year guy. Again, great tools, terrific upside, loads of untapped potential, but again, another guy that's down the road. I would have been a little bit more surprised that they went with those guys in that area had you not just mentioned or reminded me that those are the first 2 new offensive guys that have been added to the team.
Yeah, and I scratched my head a little on the Hudson, but then I know they have Bill Callahan here, and I think that is where they're starting to look down the road to be, the big contracts on Conklin and even Joel Batonio or JC Treader, different backup guys. All the good teams have guys they're developing. So you have Wyatt Teller, who they may not be able to re-sign, just depending, and in Hudson, they look at a guy that can move in this scheme. And as you said, just a year at tackle, but I think they look at him as a perfect fit for what they're doing. And then on Schwartz, he is, you mentioned it, top off speed. They're looking at him, and I could see him, if he only played 10 to 15 plays a game,
Yeah.
he could be a threat because you just send him deep. Somebody has to count for
Yeah.
him, and somebody has to count for Odell Beckham. And where Jarvis Landry and Austin Hooper thrive is underneath in the middle. And with Landry last year, they had him outside, and he's not an outside receiver. If he can come back in and play underneath in the slot, I think that's what they have in mind. And I also think I watched in training camp last year, the limited amount of it. There was no preseason games, but they tried and they used JoJo Natson in kind of that Tyreek Hill mode.
Okay.
And he tore his ACL in the third game of the year. And in that game, he actually ran a jet sweep. And most people thought he was just a punt and kick returner, and that's what he was. But they re-signed him. I think Schwartz, the idea there is, again, looking down the road when you have Landry and Beckham with 31, 32 million in 2022, if they can get this guy and even get him in packages to be that jet sweep, deep ball threat, I think it will open up more because they did not have a deep threat when they played the Chiefs. If you remember, no Beckham. So, Higgins a great receiver and Landry, but they're no speed. And so they didn't have to worry deep. Even if Schwartz just runs the bomb and takes a guy or two with him, it's going to help. And so I think that's the whole idea. They know he's unfinished, but you can't, you always hear you can't coach speed.
And we might as well stick with the last offensive guy, which in the draft, which was Felton. And I'm a big fan of Felton. I mean, I watched Felton play for the last few years, being a big college football fan and follower. And I understood why he was a 6th-round grade. If you look at it, you break him down. He doesn't break a lot of tackles. He's not overly fast, but he's one of those running backs slash receivers. He's going to be a hybrid guy, another guy that you can do a lot of things with, just like Schwartz. Of course, doesn't have the speed of Schwartz, but still a guy that can do a lot of things for you, line up in a lot of different areas. He's just productive. He's just a good football player. And good football players, there are a bunch of them in the NFL, a lot of them, hundreds of them. So not everybody has to run 4.27 to make it in the NFL. I think Felton was a really good value pick in the 6th round, and I think he's going to be around for a while. And it'll be interesting to see what kind of what kind of position that the Browns put him in.
Yeah, I think that's it. The buzzword with Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski's versatility. And they had a guy here a couple years ago before them, Duke Johnson. There was a great receiver out of the backfield. And, I can see that in this offense. You have, obviously, Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. Dearness Johnson is a really good third back, but he's not so much the receiver out of the backfield. So I think that Felton could push. And if he can do a swing running back, maybe a returner, wide receiver, they can justify keeping him around. And so I just think they're trying to provide competition. And as you said, at this point, they've loaded up this roster. This roster is probably the best roster I've ever covered in my 30 plus years. And I think it's going to be tough for a lot of these rookies to make team. But because these guys brought them in, I think obviously you've seen that they're going to have the upper hand. But when you're getting a 6th, 7th round pick, that has a good chance to make the team, that tells you, where they're going. But yeah, those are the only 3 offensive players to date they brought in that weren't on the roster last year.
Yeah, and it's not surprising that they went running back receiver either, because we talked about that. I actually had those positions. I didn't have them buried on my needs list in the draft guide, because I thought that it's such those are important backup positions for the team. Because look, like you mentioned, look what happened last year when Beckham went down. They need to have another guy there. Now they have it. Look, what would happen if one of the running backs go down? One of the two. You have to have someone else. So it's such an important aspect of their offense that you had to figure that they were going to add some depth there, and they did. But the rest was on defense, and to get Owusu Karamoa in the 2nd round, where the Browns had to be ecstatic. Everybody thought this kid was going in the 1st round. He's that typical hybrid linebacker role, something else that we touched up on before the draft, that the Browns would, they signed Anthony Walker and he can cover, but they were going to need someone else. And we talked about covering Lamar Jackson, twice a year, and how difficult that was going to be. Well, now you got one of those hybrid guys that the Browns have been looking for, and to get him in the 2nd round was a steal.
Yeah, they were ecstatic. I saw they have a show here called Building the Browns the team puts out, and they put inside the draft and showing all the conversations and so forth, which was quite interesting. And they were ecstatic, to get JOK. And he's exactly Joe Woods, to get Greg Newsom and JOK. We talked to Paul D. Podesta, who's the strategy guy, the Moneyball guy from that Oakland A movie.
Yeah.
He said that they were considering, if Newsom was gone, taking JOK there. And so they feel they got 2 first-round picks. And as you mentioned, I wrote a story. I think I talked with you about that. If you got a guy that could just run with Lamar Jackson and keep him from running for 20 yards, it'd be worth it. And they got 2 of them. Maybe in the 5th round, almost a poor man's version. Tony Fields was a hybrid when he was at Arizona before he transferred to West Virginia. So I think that, JOK, I think, can cover. And John Johnson's one of the best tight end cover safeties in the league. That's what they're adding, is those guys that can run. Walker's much faster than BJ Goodson, and that's what they want in the linebackers, guys that can go sideline to sideline and run with these mobile quarterbacks and these mobile tight ends. So I think I couldn't see a plan laid out any better than what they have able to do so far this offseason on defense.
Also, you mentioned Togiai, the tackle from Ohio State. Uh, Looking at him as one of these guys that he's got a high motor. He has good pass rush ability from the interior. Maybe that's what he's going to be, is like a situational kind of interior, third down kind of pass rush presence early on in his career. But they were able to get him in the fourth round. You mentioned Fields in the fifth round, and then LeCount from Georgia, the safety they picked up in the fifth round, their second fifth round pick, which I'm assuming he's going to start off as a primary, special teams guy before he can figure out, what his role is going to be. He may not be, he's a little bit undersized, but he's got really good instincts and he's got pretty good high IQ on the field.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, I think they're looking at quality, not where he was right now because of the injury, but 3-year starter, I think a captain for Georgia. I mean, it's a pretty high level program. And the way Joe Woods uses safeties, he even said last year that he wanted to play the big nickel ultimately and play 3 safeties and 2 linebackers. And so with Delpit and John Johnson and Ronnie Harrison, I think those are your top 3, safeties. That you still need more, and LeCount could really be that 4th or maybe 5th guy. Sheldrick Redwine, who was drafted by the previous regime, I don't think they're as high on him because he's just slight. I saw them send him on a corner blitz or safety blitz last year, and he bounced. I can't remember the quarterback, but he bounced off him.
Yeah,
he had a direct hit, and he didn't bring him down.
Yeah.
And several times with the injuries, they had a chance to play him more, but they didn't. So I think he's going to be in jeopardy. LeCount can be more of a core special teams player. And they're just adding depth. They let go some guys that were core special teams players, and Tay Davis and guys that didn't play much, on an offensive side. So I think some of these lower draft picks will have a chance to play defense. But yeah, they've just, like I said, they've added 17 new guys to the defensive side of the ball. And Togiai, I think that they feel that he could be, like Jordan Elliott last year. He may not, he can learn and develop and maybe down the road be more of a contributor, but he could right away. They had to address that because Billings is on a 1-year deal. Malik Jackson is basically a 1-year deal. Richardson was on the last year before they let him go. And so you had all these 30-plus type guys on 1 year you have to add. And Jordan Elliott was the only youngster really around. So by drafting Togiai and signing Wilson, they're hoping those guys can be kind of the inside for the future.
Wilson is, I noticed, because there wasn't a large list of undrafted free agents that the team has signed so far, but Wilson was definitely the top of the list because, again, Arledge had a third-round grade from him. But the only other one that I thought might have been notable just because of his stats was the edge rusher who you mentioned from Illinois State, Romeo McKnight, who had a ton of stats in 2019, 16 and a half tackles for loss and 12 sacks. But it's still going to be more of, you would imagine, a practice squad type of guy if they like him. But that's about it. Not many other. I mean, Harbison's a running back, had a couple of 1,000-yard seasons in the past. Keep an eye on him, another practice squad guy. But that's about it for the undrafted free agents, right?
Yeah, they only signed 5, and usually they sign 15 to 20. I think that's because they gave so much money to Wilson. I mean, they paid him like a 5th or 6th round draft pick almost. I mean, I think it was 162,000 guaranteed base salary and 30,000 bonus. So, I mean, they wanted him, and you probably know more than me. A lot of places had him as going into last year at this time, maybe a potential 1st round pick, and he kind of fell off the charts, last year. So they hope that they can put him with some of these guys like Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney and maybe light a fire under him and see the opportunity. So yeah, that could really be, and the same thing I think with Malik McDowell. The guy's never played it down, and he was like the 35th overall pick in the 2017 draft, and it was a head scratcher because that's not an Andrew Berry type move, but he feels very good with where they are with their culture and feels like, hey, you step up and show up or you're gone. We're going to give you a chance. So we'll see.
All right, Fred. Great job as always. Before I let you go, I just popped up on the board here the Orange and Brown Report homepage. So again, you could find out about the Browns also at 247 Sports. And as you mentioned, you guys, the Browns, the only NFL team on 247 Sports.
That's what I had heard. They've went away because they're a college recruiting site like
Yeah.
Rivals and Scout or 24/7. They bought Scout, and so that's one of the main things they do with all the college campuses. And so they made a decision. They have the parent company CBS Sports, and so they do stuff with the NFL. But as far as under the 24/7 Sports banner, the Orange and Brown Report is pretty much the headliner. And we have over there, we have a staff of 10, 11, people. We have a couple guys that kind of behind the scenes insiders that were all over this draft, called the Greg Newsom, the JOK. We were on that most sites up here in the Cleveland area. And so we have launched an OBR weekly show where myself and one of the insiders, Lane Adkins, is on every Tuesday night at 7 on YouTube, OBR
Okay.
Weekly. And we have on the site, we have analytics section. We have Jake Burns, who does a film breakdown almost nightly on all the players. And so there's a load of information. There's more information than you could get. Anything you're interested in. We broke all records over the draft. We did a live draft show for 3 days during the draft, and then we're also on YouTube, and we're actually doing the schedule Wednesday night, at 8 o'clock, a live show. So you can get all the information on the Browns you want. A lot of it's free. There's also some of the insider information, like what's happening behind the scenes, rumors, who they signing, things like that our guys are all over. And we'll have that on there, as well. So check it out. Got free things. There are all kinds of deals going on at theobr.com.
Yeah, I see it right here. Matter of fact, this is your article, 5 steps to put the Cleveland Browns in a position to compete for the NFL's top prize post-NFL draft. So that's right here on the homepage. And as you mentioned,
That just went up while we were doing this show. I've done a series pre-free agency and it's pretty much the 5 steps I laid out. Number 1 was get an edge rusher. Number 2 was get a cornerback. Number 3 was get a safety. Number 4 was get an interior defensive lineman. And number 5 was a linebacker. and I took it through, and you can see what they've done and where I think they stand. So that's a free article, so anybody can check it out.
There it is. There's the article right there. You can read it here all the way down the line, starting with signing a top edge rusher, as you mentioned. So, and there's the analytics right there. You got the film rooms breaking down players. So again, check that out. The Orange and Brown Report over at 247 Sports. All right. Great job, Fred. Appreciate it as always. Well, next time we talk to you, more than likely is going to be when we're going to preview training camp and or preview the season. So we look forward. Can't wait for that to happen, because this is kind of going to be like the only dead time of the year for football fans between the draft and training camp. So we all can't wait till training camp begins.
That's right. It's like a little dead season, and then it gets hot and heavy. So thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Fred.